Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you Vicki. Thanks for everybody for coming to this web training session. Today we have Katie Jenedek from the Minnesota Population Center, and she's going to be talking to us about public use microdata samples, and specifically about using the integrated public user microdata sample system for accessing that data. It's a very user-friendly system. I love it, and it has much more capability than I have been able to learn on my own. So that's why I've asked Katie to do this presentation, and I would especially like to thank Ed, Christopher, and Gary Thomas, who have helped with the technology portion of getting this session set up today, because I am technically challenged. My role was to get Katie to the training session, but setting up all the web training material is really Ed and Gary. The session is being recorded. A lot of people said they wanted to come today and couldn't make it, so Gary is recording the session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Katie, and she's going to give us background on the IPUMS data, as well as do some show and tell of the system for doing your own online queries. Okay, thanks, Katie.
You're welcome. Hi, this is Katie, and I'm speaking to you from the Minnesota Population Center, which is out of the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And first of all, I'm just going to do a little overview of what the IPUMS is and what the Minnesota Population Center has. And then, as Elaine said, we will do sort of some examples of what our system can do. So just to start, the Minnesota Population Center, again, we're at the University of Minnesota, and we're a large research center that's interdisciplinary. We have 19 different departments participating in our center. We provide education and training out of the center. We have seminars, workshops. We have professional training, and then also we have a graduate demography curriculum. But our main sort of duty as a center is providing our data tools, and we're the home of the IPUMS. So we have created new data tools for using IPUMS data, and we provide all this data and have it here. So IPUMS is Integrated Public Use Microdata Series. We integrate the public use data. We integrate all of the documentation, and we like to think of ourselves as integrating the user's needs. So public use microdata are samples from the Census Bureau. They show responses for individuals, families, and households. So unlike aggregate data where you get tables from the census, this data is actually individual level data where you are seeing all of their responses to the questionnaire, but then we only get a limited amount of them. So we have 5% samples, 1% samples of the whole U.S. population. This is allowed because there's a suppression of geography, so that we do not know where these people live exactly, so we can't figure out who they are. That's what sort of allows these public use samples to exist. Microdata does allow for some more sophisticated analysis than an aggregate table would, and it also allows users to make custom tables and work through it themselves, the data. So the geographic limitations that I was mentioning was that you can't identify an area with less than 100,000 people. So you can identify states and often large cities, but you can't get down to what census tract or block or even sometimes smaller cities that people are living in. And again, sometimes these boundaries don't always align with the boundaries that we have created as far as cities. Like sometimes you can't identify a city because the Census Bureau's identification system doesn't work within those city boundaries. Again, mainly for this discussion, we're going to be working with newer samples, but there are no confidentiality restrictions for the samples through 1930, so we do have all of the geographic information available for those samples. So at the Minnesota Population Center, our main microdata source is the U.S. Census data, the decennial census data, and now the American Community Survey, which the Census Bureau just started in 2000, and that's a yearly survey. We also have the current population survey going back to 1962 when they started it. We also have the largest collection of census data from around the world with IPUMS International. We currently have 35 countries worth of data, and we're planning on adding about 10 countries every single year for about the next 5 years. We have the National Health Interview Survey, the American Time Use Survey, and then we also have a project called the North Atlantic Population Project, where we're following people in historical censuses previous to 1900 across countries. So IPUMS-USA, which we're focusing on today, was our first project. It started in 2000. It's our most widely used database. All of the documentation for this database is online, and we have every decennial census from 1850 to 2000, except for 1890 because it was burned in the fire. So that's not available to anyone. And the American Community Survey from 2000 to 2007. The American Community Survey, again, was started in 2000. Between 2000 and 2004, it was in its first stages, so it's smaller samples. But then in 2005, we're up to 1% samples of the United States. It includes group quarters now, which was something Elaine had mentioned was of interest to some of the transportation researchers. And it's destined to kind of continue as it's replacing the long form in the 2010 census. So it's continuing. The plan is every year a 1% sample of the U.S. It's also a rolling sample, so unlike the decennial census samples that were all asked in April, this sample is given out monthly, and we don't know when the respondents in the public use data were asked their questions. It could be any time throughout the year. One of the new things the Census Bureau just released was multi-year estimates for the year 2005 and 2007. They grouped everything together so you can have a bigger sample of people, a larger sample. So we take these pump samples here at the Minnesota Population Center and we integrate them by creating consistent industrial and occupational coding. So if you're doing research across time, we've provided a consistent way to control for industry and occupation. We've also done the best we can in making consistent public use microdata areas and metropolitan area classifications, so trying to keep geography consistent over time. The Census Bureau has a habit of changing sort of geographic boundaries, and we try and keep them as consistent as possible to do research over time. And probably the largest benefit that we think we've done to the data is making these family interrelationship variables, where we've created families and you can attach characteristics of your spouse or children onto a person record, and we can identify, we've tried to identify who's related to whom within a household. All of our documentation is again online, and the main source of documentation is a variable description. We put in the availability of it, what the universe is, who this question or this variable applies to, if there's any issues with comparability across time, any issues with allocation and imputation flags. We also provide links to questions that were given to the respondents, so you can see the actual questionnaire they saw, and also if there were additional instructions to the enumerator. We also provide additional documentation on what's been done over the years in terms of variable creation, comparability across samples, detailed information on geography, and other variables we've created. And finally, what we're going to be looking at today is the online extraction and analysis system, where we provide all of this data in an easy-to-use online format. All of our data is free. You can either use the extraction system, which creates custom data files and syntax files, and you read them into a statistical analysis program, such as SAS or Stata. But then the other system that we have is this online system, where you don't need to have a statistical program to use it, which is what I'm going to show you now.
Okay, so before we let you go on to show it, let's see if there are any questions from the group.
Great.
So I think you hit *1 if you want to ask a question, and the operator will open up your line.
That is correct. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name.
Okay, then we'll let Katie do the show and tell of the software now.
Great. So I think everyone can see now online. I'm on our IPUMS-USA homepage. This is our website. I'm on the internal site because it's right about the noon hour, which is a really popular time to be on our website. So I've elected to use the internal site because it'll move a little bit faster for us. But this is identical to what our website looks like, and you can see right away there's a lot of options. But I think the really important thing that we do, and it's important for using our online analysis system, is knowing where the documentation is for these variables. And you can see there's a documentation section on the left side, and there's a data, variables, samples, documentation links on the left side. What I talked about before was the variables description, which is incredibly important. If we click on variables, and then you can scroll down, we have different sections of variables. And on the right side, under the person record, we have place of work and travel time variables, which are going to be most of the variables that we use today. And you can see variables you're probably familiar with: means of transportation to work, carpooling, riders, travel time to work, and so on. So if we click the variable title, such as tram work, we're brought to the variable description. And here you can see availability. It's available from 1960 onward. When there's a little funny eye here, you can scroll over it, and it'll tell you what samples it is available for that year, as there's multiple samples per year. And the more recent years that we're going to be looking at, the ACS samples, there are only one sample per year, thus there's an X. So if we drop down below that, there's the universe statement. For the ACS, down below, it's persons age 16 and over who worked last week. So anyone who is over the age of 16 and worked last week was asked the question in regards to how they got to work if they worked last week. Below that is the description of the variable. Tram work reports the respondent's primary means of transportation to work on the most recent day work or over the course of the previous week, as in the ACS. The comparability section is short here, but in other variables it's sometimes long, as it provides detailed documentation on what has changed over the years of the question being asked. You can see that there's a flag for trend work, which indicates if the variable was imputed by the Census Bureau or not. So if the flag has a 1, then or some sort of code, then for that respondent it has been imputed as opposed to what was actually answered. And very useful below it are the questions to respondents. So for the ACS, we can click that link, and it will take us directly to the question and how it was asked. This is often important to researchers. How did this person usually get to work last week? And you can see all of the options there that they were allowed to check, which then turn into this variable that we have now. So I'm going to go back to the variable description and scroll up to a link called Codes and Frequencies, which will give us the codes for almost directly related to what they were asked about what they will have in the data. So anyone that took an auto, truck, or van has a code of 10 in 2007. You can see over here the availability X's will indicate what codes are available for which years. If you click the case count view, it will give an overview of the total number of people in 2007 that had those responses. I'm going to head back to the home page now that we've sort of seen the variable description and just show you some other sorts of documentation that may be useful for you. I always recommend new users check out the frequently asked questions page. There's lots of different questions, especially with the online extract system, that are answered here. And it's very easy because we get these questions a lot, and they're common and very helpful when using the extract system. Another place from the home page that I think is useful is the samples. You can see all of the different samples we have available, and if you click one of the samples, we can see what that sample is comprised of, what percent sample it is, what's the geographic limitations for that sample, how many people are in that sample. So another good place for documentation is the samples page. And finally, our documentation, our user's guide page provides sort of in-depth documentation for some of the variables we create, what we add to the data, and also information from the Census Bureau, such as the original code books and their imputation procedures.
Katie?
Yes?
Can you go to Geography, because I want you to show where the shape files are?
Yes, definitely. So I clicked the Geography link from that documentation page, and you can see right at the top we have a whole page of Geographic tools going back to some of the older censuses. But for the more recent samples, we have public use microdata areas for 2000, 2005, and 2006, and it says includes boundary files. So if we go to this page, you can see that for every state there's a map and detailed contents of these PUMA, which are the sort of smallest level of geography that the Census Bureau has created for doing estimates. So kind of like their counties are not available, or small areas, what they've created is this PUMA instead. And if we click on the detailed content, you'll see a list of what cities and often counties are included in PUMAs. And what Elaine was talking about is there's a map, so you can see directly which PUMAs align with which counties. And at the very bottom, you can go to the boundary files. On this computer, I don't think I actually have the software available for us to open up and see a shapefile, but they're zipped up in this package, and you can open them up, and if you have ArcGIS, you are welcome to see the shapefiles for these areas. Are there any other questions about the documentation before we move on to the examples? Elaine? Anyone?
Okay, I guess we're ready to have you do some show and tell and put up a file and picking variables.
Elaine?
Yes, Ed?
Yeah, I didn't think I was muted. I just had one question as Katie was going through some of the stuff on the web page. Are there tutorials on how to get to the data and go through some of that stuff?
They're not tutorials, yes, but what there are some detailed instructions. If we go, they are around, to create an extract. We do have some examples of how to go through the extract system, what to do, and then also there are instructions about downloading the data on your PC.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and so just as a reminder, we'll ask Katie to give us a copy of her PowerPoints from earlier, and we'll post them in the room for downloading. And also this session is being recorded, and Gary will send me the link, and I will send the link to the people who attended today's session as well as the people who couldn't attend today.
And related to that is that here at IPUMS we provide user feedback basically all the time. If you have questions at all or concerns, we encourage you to email us, and it's here on this page, technical assistant, ipums@pop.umn.edu. And for anyone that's used other data sources, sometimes it's really hard to get anyone to help you at all, but we try to respond to all emails we get within a few days, and we'll make sure that you can get the data and everything's going okay. So just want to encourage people, if they have questions, to please email us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And now, on the left here, so we have this data, creating an extract, downloading or revising extracts. That's the online extraction system that creates syntax files and data for your statistical packages. But right below that, there's a link to analyzing data online. And this online analysis system was actually created, I believe, out of Berkeley. And we use it. They let us use it for our data. And it's a pretty amazing system that allows you to analyze the data, all of it, these huge data files online. So again, here, just back to examples, and screenshots are available from this instruction page, which is not working on my computer. But from the live site, it definitely will. There is a short instructions page that will help you get through it. And I think we're going to use data from a single year. So when I scroll down to the bottom here, you can look at all the years together. But for ease of us looking at it, we're just going to look at 2007. And this is what the page looks like. What I like to do when I'm on SBA is open another tab next to it and go straight to the variables page. so that I can always look while I'm doing it at what the variables actually are. I think that's an important element of analyzing the data online, is understanding the data that's there and understanding the variables and all of the documentation on our homepage and our website, because it sort of provides all the codes and additional information you may need beyond just looking directly at the variable itself here in the SDA. So it sends us right to this SDA frequencies and cross-tabulation program. So I thought we'd start by looking at a couple of variables that may be of interest to you. I thought we would go back down and look at some of these transportation variables. And if you see to the left here, there's a small little 2007 user system, and this provides all of the variables that we see back on our documentation site. So I'm going to click to place of work and travel time. And I was hoping to look at this means of transportation and work. If I click this variable, it will head up to this variable selection box up above, and I'm now going to view it. So when I view it, I can see what the different, what the labels are, what the value is that corresponds to these labels, and what labels are available for this year, and approximately how many people are in each of these sort of values. So I'm going to start by looking at this variable. You can click, I can either type it in, or using these buttons on the left, copy it to a row. And then the other variable I'm going to look at in this cross-tabulation is group quarters. And Elaine had mentioned this, that when they added group quarters back in to the ACS in 2005, that there was some variation in transportation by adding these different group of people that do not live in households but live in other sorts of living arrangements that could be considered group quarters, such as a dorm. So this variable is GQ. And just to start looking at one state, I was thinking, as opposed to the whole country, I thought state FIP, state FIP, is one of the geographic state variables, and we can see what the codes are. And I was thinking maybe we could look at DC. So value 11. I'm doing a selection filter here. So now I've restricted the table to any respondent that is in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of options you can see right here for making this table that's going to be created, things you want to be included. Also the weight, it automatically selects a person weight, which makes the respondents nationally representative for Washington, D.C. And we will now run the table. So we can see right here, this is giving us frequencies. So households and group quarters, see the number and the percentage of people in households driving an auto, truck, or van is greater than the group quarters crew, which is, I believe, what Elaine had thought. And if we go down to bicycle, we're not getting very many at all from group quarters. Walked only is pretty high across all of them, though. I can close down this table and decide, you know what, I don't want to look at District of Columbia. Let's look at California, which will likely have a very different transportation means of transportation than Washington, D.C. So California is 6. Run that table.
Okay, so Katie, when you get back in, so that first row is 0, which is not available, which is basically people who aren't workers.
Exactly. So I was thinking on this.
It's what the software is doing is calculating those as the percent values. So if we filter those people out, then we'll get the table to only show people who are actually workers at work. Workers.
I think the best way to do that is to use the emstat variable. Since we looked at the universe for this, and it's people that are worked last week, so they will have an employment status, And we can go and find this and see what the code is. So at work is 10. We have has job not working, in armed forces, unemployed, and not in labor force. But for this, we'll just look at people at work, since that's who they asked. The other thing is there was an age restriction, so we can put in that age is 16 to, we could do 65. And that will get us basically everyone who answered this question. And we can run this table, and we should not have any more people in the zero. And there's our new table. So again, this is the frequencies table for California. We can see the large percentage of people in households that take auto, truck, or van to work. And also the number of people on bicycles down below. So another thing that Elaine had mentioned to me was that there's some variation in transportation to work based on your race and whether you're Hispanic or not. So I feel like that brings up an interesting point because of the race, ethnicity, and nativity variables. There is a race variable and also a Hispan variable for Hispanic, which there it is. So there's Hispanic origin and also race. If we look at Hispan right now, you can see there's 0 is not Hispanic, and then there are a lot of Hispanic different specification details in the Hispanic variable. But what this brings us to is the idea of creating a variable to put all of Hispanics at one and all non-Hispanics in another. So a new feature here on SDA is creating a variable. So we can recode this Hispan variable. I'm going to call it Hispan recode. And so we put the existing variables we're going to use to create this new variable, which I'm going to give values 0s and 1. We'll just say not Hispan and in this recode, so we've now created what our output variable wants to look like. We want a 0-1 variable, a 0 for not Hispanic and a 1 for Hispanic. And so we're going to use this Hispan variable to create the new one. If you have a 0 in Hispan, then we're going to continue to have a 0 in this output variable. And now if we have any other values, which look to be 100 through 498, then you will be getting a 1. So we can create this variable, and it looks like this. You can see 12% of the population is Hispanic and 87% in the sample is not. So now I'm going to go back to doing our crosstab and look at our transportation and our Hispan recode. We'll continue looking at California and just those that are employed within the age range. So I'll run this table. And you can see those that are Hispanic and not Hispanic. And
Katie?
Yes.
Can you just briefly explain this color coding?
The color coding scheme. Yep, the color coding's on the bottom, and the color coding scheme is explained there. So as we get down, these are sort of, they're looking at our distance away from our mean using a z-statistic. So those that are blue are less than 2 standard deviations, I believe, away from the mean, and the ones that are red are over 2. So as we get closer to the middle, it's closer to our mean. And when it's looking at, for a mean like this, is the mean of both of them. So it's the mean of non-Hispanic and Hispanic workers in all of these columns.
Okay, so in other words, up, go back up.
Up.
Go back up to where it says bus. So it's Go down a little bit.
Okay. More?
Yeah. Okay, so right there.
Okay.
So in other words, the Hispanic percent is 6.2, and for non-Hispanics it's 2.7.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's dark blue and dark red, it means it's, they're both very different from the mean.
Yes.
Right. So actually one of the biggest differences is in carpooling, but for carpooling you need two variables. You need transportation to work, and you need the carpooling variable. So that would be another one to recode.
Great. Yeah, I think we could even we could recode a variable that has this carpooling, driving alone, and then other transportation. Is that sort of what you were thinking? We'll go yes.
So if you could make a recoded variable using the two variables, tran work and I think it's called carpool.
We also have a number of riders. So I think, so I'm back at the recoding variable. So we're going to create a new transportation variable, just like Elaine suggested. And we can use this tran work variable as well as the carpool variable. And then another variable that I think may be of use here is the riders. So the number of riders that you're carpooling with, whether you're carpooling with 2 people or you're in a large carpool with 3 or more people. So this would be the start of creating this variable. So we're going to have an output. We're going to have a 1, we'll say if you drive alone. A 2 if you carpool with 2 people. And then a 3 if you carpool with 3 or more?
Yeah, and then you could do all other.
All other.
For these purposes.
Great. So basically mass transit and walking is all together then. So looking at this transportation to work variable that the census has, if we go look at it again, we can see that that we know that a 10 means you're in an auto, truck, or van, and that 20 and greater are these other modes of transportation, unless we want to include motorcycles with driving. I'm not sure how that works. But so basically everyone in a car will have these 10s, and then this, I believe, is 20 to 50. However, those are including the work from home, so maybe we should do 20 to 60 and just drop everyone that works at home since they're not commuting. Now we go to this variable 2, which is carpool. So we can look at the carpool variable and see that number 1, a value of 1 is drive alone, a value of 2 is carpool. So these people that drive alone will need a 1 there. And those carpooling will need a 2 under carpooling. And all the others should have a 0. Yep. And finally, if we look at number of riders, or vehicle occupancy, we see a 0 for no one, and then a 1 drives alone, 2, 3, and so on. So we have a 1, 2, and it was 3 through 9, and a 0 for everyone else. So I think this should create for us, this is recoding into a new means of transportation variable, what we want to see. Except for that the variable name already exists. So we'll give it a new name. 2. There we have it. Drive alone, carpool 2, carpool 3 plus, and all other people. And we have this, everyone that's not included in this variable are those that work at home and those that weren't in the in our population in the beginning. They weren't in the universe. So we have this new variable. We can go back and look at our original crosstabs now.
Can we use that Hispanic thing?
Sure, definitely. And do we still want to look at California, or is there a different?
Sure.
All right. And we'll run the table.
Okay, so now you'll see down on that second line, carpal 2, carpal 3, that the Hispanic workers really do have a much higher carpal rate than non-Hispanic workers.
By a lot, yeah.
Yeah, by a lot.
It's a difference, and you can see they're different from one another.
Were you going to show us a little logit regression thing?
Definitely.
Or something?
The other thing I think that may be useful for people that we can do quickly just with this data we've created right now is comparing means as well. You can see under this analysis tab that there's a lot of options. But sort of just like we did with the cross-tabulation, we can do basically the same thing. And another variable that just may be of interest that we have here in the ACS is time that it takes to transit. And we can use that same variable we just created. And for fun, we can look at it across gender. And we're able to compare across the means. So they are different from one another. You can see in the colors. So this will give you the mean driving time by male and female by our new transportation thing. So on average, males drive alone for 23. That drive alone are on the road for 23.94 minutes. So that's our mean.
Okay, right. So for drive alone and carpal 2 and carpal 3, the men have longer average travel times, but for all other, the women have longer.
Yep.
That's interesting, huh? It must be, I don't know, longer bus rides? So,
it'd be longer
anyway,
walks.
Something for someone to contemplate.
Yeah.
I maybe write an article for the CTPP status report.
It's definitely fun to get an overview of what's going on and give you ideas.
Yeah, like, there aren't that many places where taxi is used very much, and that would be using the IPUMS data would be one way to get at taxi, people using taxis or people using bicycling, because the data for taxis or bicycling is really going to be suppressed in any of the standard products in ACS, and it's also going to be suppressed in the CTPP tabulations. So if you want to get at populations that have very small populations, and you want to look at multiple characteristics of that group, whether it's age or age and gender or age and gender and income, it's really the best places to use the IPUMS data set.
I agree. I think, too, when looking at this comparison of means, another variable that comes to mind that could be an important variable for researchers of transportation is the number of vehicles in a house. And it's under the household record here. We have this vehicles, either, sometimes I have to search for it. The dwelling characteristics maybe somewhere in there. There is a number of vehicles that we have, which it is vehicles, is what it's called. And when we look at this, I think an important reason for looking at this is it brings up the importance of documentation, because so if we're going to look at vehicles here, and a good thing, we'll compare across cities the number of vehicles available. And I'm going to grab city codes just because I know the big ones off the top of my head. LA, New York. I think this is Seattle. That would be a good one. And then DC again. So these are using our city variable codes, which again, not all cities are identifiable, but some are, especially the big ones. And then I'm putting in the relate code for head of household because vehicles is a household variable. So in the IPUMS data, when we rectangularize the data, we attach all of these household records to the individual record. So sometimes if you're looking at individuals and you want to know by individual how many vehicles are in their household, you're welcome to do that. But by restricting it to the head of household, we're actually then looking basically at households and this one person in the head of household, how many vehicles are available for each household. So if we run this table, which I didn't include city as a column, so we didn't get to see the fun part. It looks kind of funny when looking at it at first, because we're seeing that here are these all other people in carpool 3 looking like they have a lot of vehicles in their home. An average or a mean of 6 vehicles or 4 vehicles seems really strange. And the reason it's seeming strange is that if we go look back at our documentation and we go to the variable vehicle and look at the codes page, we can see that no vehicles available has a code of 9. And this is why it's incredibly important to continue looking, because very often an NA code will actually be 99, or a code in these higher code values will represent basically a 0 person or a person where it's not available for, which can cause problems then when we're looking at this table and it starts to look kind of funny, like why do these people that shouldn't have any vehicles have a lot of them? So if we recode this vehicle so that our 0 is back with a 0 person, so we have 0 and 0, and it'll make more sense when we look at this cross-tabulation. So I'm going to create, in case there's another one, but vehicle recode 2, and we're just going to do a nice little recode on this. And we'll just do a 4 plus cars. So this variable before was a 9, we remember. And then there's a 1, 2, and we'll do 4 through 7 vehicles. So now we have a new vehicle variable, and when we go back and look at our old analysis using vehicle recode 2, and I think we'll get a very different table. So now that looks a lot more accurate when we look and we see that people that are not using carpooling or cars to get to work actually have less cars in the home on average. So just a little note to look at our variable descriptions.
Okay, let's see, before Katie goes on to the regression,
okay.
Let's see if there's any questions from the participants.
Great.
So hit star 1 if you want to ask a question.
Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 and record your name.
Does anybody have a little table that they'd like Katie to try before she goes to the regression part?
Yeah, that's a good idea, too. Or if you have
this is Liang. I have a question.
Okay.
So for the city code, those codes are in the documentation?
Okay, one more time. What was that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, for New York, you have like 4-digit code.
Yes.
I'm wondering where can we find those city codes?
These codes. Okay, so if we go back to our geographic area right here, I'm going to click the variable city, which will pop up into the selected variable, and then we can view it. Just like those other variables, we now have a list of the cities. It's important to look here, too, and see what cities have people in them, because this list provides the cities that are identified across all of our samples. And in the 2007 sample, it's going to be different than in other samples. So we can then go down to something like New York. And if I can get there. And there we see it's 4610. Again, these codes are exactly identical to if you were going to go back to our original page here like I have, and go to variables, geographic variables, and go to the city codes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions or questions about specific variables, whether we have them or not, or particularly these geographic variables?
Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 and record your name. One moment. Cliff Cook, you may ask your question.
My question is, when you recode a variable, does it appear anywhere on the left-hand side of the IPUMS screen where you can select it, or you just have to remember the name of the variable?
It doesn't show up on the left-hand side there, but what you can do is you can go up to this Create Variables section on the top like I have, and you have the option, Recode Variables, and then there's a list of created variables. And this retains lists of variables that other people have created as well. So that's kind of nice because you can go and see some of the other variables. These college education variables are really important. Here's our Hispan recode.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so some of the variables that you're going to want to recode because it is the microdata record are things like travel times because they're reported in minutes, or household income. When you're using American Fact Finder or ACS or CTPP, we have all of those grouped into very large categories.
Okay.
And so you're going to have to recode those classes into what makes sense for your own purposes.
I think that's why the documentation is so useful to see sort of what all the values are, what's available, and what you can do with them.
Yeah, and I think it's really important is that's actually the benefit of this system because there, like, let's say time leaving home to go to work. I mean, there's really late cities and there's early cities, kind of depending on what kind of industry is predominant in your area, and so. You might want to have more detail in early morning hours, and some other place might want to have more detail in kind of the later morning hours, and those tables aren't available in ACS or CTPP. Are there any other questions?
At this time, we have no further questions.
Okay, I have a question before we go on, Katie.
Great.
So now we have this lovely table with these color coding and stuff. And how can I save that?
I think the best way to save them is to, and I'm looking for an example here, to copy it and to paste it into Excel. There isn't a great way at this point to save them all online. You don't have a user account, unlike the online extract system where once you create a user account, we save all of your previous extracts. You can always go look and see what you've done in the past. Using the online, it's an interactive sort of system, so you can't save anything you've done other than to copy and paste the table into another sort of form. We like Excel here. It formats really nicely to Excel, but it also works in putting it into some other sort of Word documents as well. Does that?
Yes. Okay, so I think you should go to the next one and showing us a regression.
Great. So under this analysis, you can see there's also correlation matrices and comparison of them, and we get to the multiple regression and the logit and probit regression. And I actually created a variable already. So if we go to that list of created variables called drive, and it allows us to view the variable here. And what I did is I created a variable where we can, I did it right before this, where you get a 1 if you drive a motorcycle or a car or you're carpooling to work, and you get a 0 if you're taking all other forms of public transportation or walking or biking for that matter. So basically we've created a 0-1 dichotomous variable so we can run a probit or a logit on it. So we'll put that into the dependent variable. I'm a fan of a probit, but if anyone's more familiar with logit, the program does either one. And then we can pick our independent variables. One of the nice things about these independent variables is that you can create a dichotomous variable basically interactively or for the short term. So a variable like sex, where 1 is male and 2 is female, we can do this little coding scheme where we say D1, which makes males 1 and all other values, which in this case is 2, 0. So males will have 1 and women will have 0. That way it just makes the variable a little easier to interpret. Other information about what you can type in here in different coding, there's tons of documentation on this SDA. If you click that independent, it will tell you right there what can be there, how to do dummy variables, just like we did. Also, how to do interaction terms. You can square terms and do other things within the system as well. And all of that documentation is available just by clicking on the links here. So we can now include sex. I guess some other variables that may be of interest are probably age. We can control for what city they're in. This will just include all people that have identifiable cities. So we're basically restricting the regression at this point to just those in cities who have a value for city. But this way it also controls for what large city they're in. Maybe that the Hispan recode variable we made. If there are any other variables, obviously you can put many in. And we can also include a selection filter. Let's say we just wanted to run this for men or women. We've included a sex dummy, so we don't need to. But if you wanted to restrict it to a certain sex of the population, you can. There's also different options for what statistics you want available, and decimal places, and even more room for more independent variables. You can put a lot of variables.
Can you put in earnings?
Sure, yep. We can do, this is independent your wage coming in. Another variable, there's also total income, but that includes, this is only income from working. So it's pretty commonly used when looking at individual choice equations. So we run from here. We can always go back and modify it. So one of the nice things about the program.
Okay, well, we'll see how this runs, and then we'll ask people for their ideas, what variables they think might work better.
We also are welcome to do, again, a multiple regression on a different one as well, but we can see, here you can see the t-statistics and the probability. Sex obviously had little bearing on it, but age is slightly more. The ink wage is a little, it says it has you could say it has a 0 effect is what it's looking like here. That's a little misleading because of the size that ink wage is increasing. Basically what you're seeing there is the change in drive when you increase wage $1. And because we're looking at these large wages, we're not seeing very much movement on it. But if we, again, created a new variable and restricted it down in terms of like $100 or something like that, we would likely see a lot more movement on it, as it is significant. I think when we standardize it in a regular regression sense, you can see a lot more what's going on with ink wage.
So, Katie, is there something that has like metropolitan size or something like that?
Probably.
So if people have an idea of what variable might work better and they'd like to see it run in this little regression for today's exercise, please hit *1.
Definitely let us know. There is a city population, so it tells you the population of the city you live in. And I know there's an urban-rural status.
Let's use that.
Okay. Let's make sure I can find it. Oh, not available for the ACS. So there was a good... So I went over here and checked when I didn't see urban, and I found this urban-rural status, and you can see it's available for most years, leading up to about 1990, and then it's not available anymore.
Okay.
Sometimes there's a metro.
Yeah, I think metropolitan.
It's probably the other. Yep, we do have metro. So the metro status feeds us with not in metro area, central city, outside central city.
Yeah, let's use that.
That one. All right.
If it's variables available.
Yeah, and we could, we'll do 2 to 4.
Okay, does anybody else have any ideas of variables they'd like to test in this little model?
Even ditch. This I will include more people outside of the city. So I turned it into a dichotomous variable where you're either in the city or you're out of the city, or you're in the metro or you're not. Yeah, if there's anything else, we could put the means of transportation in that. That would not really help.
No.
That's not really help us since that's making sense.
No, I mean, what about household income? That's what we like to use.
Okay.
Of wages, because, you know, if I'm a spouse and I only have a part-time job, a lot of times my whether I drive is more of a function of my total household, not just my personal wages.
Yeah, another, it might also be whether, like, how many vehicles you have in your household. Mm-hmm. Could also determine if we drive, so we could put, add those. Can't remember exactly what we called the vehicle one. This one's taking a little longer to think about.
Yeah, so I think some MPOs are looking at auto ownership models.
Okay.
You can play around with this software to look at vehicle ownership for your area by doing a filter for maybe your metropolitan area, or looking at metropolitan areas of a certain size, or actually picking out certain metropolitan area codes. So how did this work? Did this look a little better or not?
I think so. We're definitely getting you're less likely to drive if you're Hispanic, and then also we're saying if you're in the metro. So you're more likely to drive if you live outside of a metropolitan area.
Okay, so operator, can we open up all the lines to see if there's questions?
Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name. Cliff Cook, you may ask your question.
Oh, well, I was going to suggest that you include housing tenure in that analysis that you had just run.
Housing tenure, like how long you've lived?
No, owner versus renter status.
Owner, okay. That's our, so people can see our ownership, which is owned free and clear, owned mortgage or loan, rented, cash, that kind of thing. But we can just include the variable and control for it.
Well, I guess I should have had Ed help me more on this, because I'm kind of interested to find out if people think they'd actually, after this little training session, if you feel comfortable going to the site yourself and playing around with the software, and if you think that this is going to be useful to you in your work. But I didn't have Ed set those up as questions before we started. No, it's my fault. Ed's saying I'm blaming him for not being prepared. I'm the one that's not prepared. Okay, now we have the new variable called ownership. Go ahead, Katie.
So it's included in the regression now. We didn't create a variable. We could have done it, and I maybe should have, basically just comparing those that own and those that rented. And maybe I should do it one more time. It would be clear on sort of what our beta is saying. At this point, with now controlling for ownership, it makes the vehicle recode really large in its effect. I mean, more cars. But let's...
Yeah, so I mean, I think people can see, you know, like, I think mortgage status was part of that.
Okay.
And probably the amount that you owe on your mortgage, is that on the record? I don't remember. I am an ACS sample, but I don't know what year.
Sure.
So, maybe, if you own it free and clear versus having some huge mortgage would make a difference. Maybe you feel really poor because your mortgage is so big, and then you have to walk to work.
Yeah. So I think all of those variables, there's a lot of household variables that will likely be very useful in this. So we have the amount of rent and other household variables.
Okay, Katie. Was there anything else you wanted to show us?
I think this was the main,
don't
we got on that.
Don't get out.
No. But definitely if we have any questions or things that we'd like to run, I had, there is a multiple regression program. I'm not sure how many, you guys maybe don't do as much of that. If you're not probably looking at quite as many continuous variables. You're dependent. But it is available if people are interested in using it. And definitely if there are questions, even right now, about any of the samples or the system, here to help.
Katie, this is Ed Christopher. I guess I've always had, and I've been a little bit confused over the number of samples when we talk about ACS.
Okay.
And 1-year PUMS and 3-year PUMS and 5-year PUMS.
Okay.
Like I'm used to 1% and 3% samples, and what those sizes are, and I just don't know how the ACS plays into it sample size wise.
So the ACS is a 1-year sample. It's done every year, and now they're 1% samples of the United States. That's what we're getting. The public use sample is a 1% sample. I think the actual sample is closer to a 3% sample, which is maybe where you're getting the 3 and 1%. The combined samples, which we have available, we have the newest one available on the extract system. We don't have available on the online analysis yet, and that's when they're combining, which isn't even on this, the 2005 to 2007 samples. And I believe they're doing that to just to make it a larger. You're combining all of these people in the ACS they're all individually sampled, so there's no overlap. So you're creating a bigger sample, so you can hopefully in the end, when they kind of even get better at this and improve it, you can identify people to smaller level of geography because you have more people in your sample.
So to recap, the 3-year ACS PUMS is at the smaller PUMAs, the 3% PUMA zones.
I think that's the hope in the end.
The 100,000 pop zones. And then the number of records would be approximating what we had before?
Yes, basically it'd be the same. I mean, they're the same. It's all the households and persons from the 1% sample. So and you have the year in there. So they've just combined them all together. And it's weighted, so now it's reweighted, so this larger sample is nationally representative.
Okay. I guess I should ask the question a little different way. For the 3-year PUMS, the number of records in it, how does that match what was in the 2000 PUMS in terms of number of records that you get?
The 2000, like the 2000 decennial census?
Right.
So the decennial census PUMS, there was actually 2 of them that came out. There was a 1% and a 5% sample.
I mean, yeah, that's what when I was saying 3%, I meant to say I was thinking of 5.
A 5. So that's part of the difference is that with the decennial census, the Census Bureau has this whole huge database of everyone, and then from that they're taking these samples, these 5% and 1% samples. With the ACS, they're only asking these questions to the 3% of the population.
I guess where I'm heading at is I'm trying to come up with a feel for the number of records that we're getting from ACS from 1, 3, and when we get 5-year. And I guess the question is going to come back when we get the 5-year PUMS. Will that give us the same amount of records that the 5% sample would have given us?
Yes, it will give us basically close to that same amount. The only difference could be that if we get the 5-year, whether they base it on the 2010 amount or the 2000. because the 2000 sample is, there's more people, however, slightly more in the 2010 than there will be in the 2000, they'll likely base it off that number. If they continue to base it off the 2000, you should get almost the identical amount of people.
Okay. Because that starts to fly in the face of the quality of the data.
Yes. You start to... It is, it's different because of the sampling techniques are obviously slightly different.
Yeah, well,
in the sense
putting all that aside, all the methodological issues, just total number of records.
It will be really close to the same. You're going to get a really similar amount to the 5%, probably identical number of records.
Okay, I have a question for Gary. I hope he's still on. Gary, if we put all the participants up on the screen and we ask them questions and ask people to raise their hands, does that work? And we can see how many people say yes or no?
If Katie's done sharing her screen, she could end sharing.
Okay, I would say, can we just make it smaller?
Or she could just make it smaller. Try and grab the left-hand side.
Whoa.
Mine does something weird. Stop sharing. I'll do that for this minute.
Okay.
Oh, it's still kind of going crazy.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so now if we ask people to raise their hand, then I can ask a question and ask people to raise their hand for yes and no?
Sure.
Okay, everybody. Based on today's session, how many of you think you'll actually try running a table on the IPUMS website?
And for those of you who haven't done this, go to the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You'll see a little icon of a person raising their hand, and you can elect your status there by raising your hand.
Okay.
Or raising their hand if they're going to use it.
Okay, that's great. Okay, now lower your hand. I'm going to ask another question. Okay, so how did you guys lower your hands yet?
Almost.
All right. Okay, how many people think that it looked pretty easy to use? Okay.
Elaine, I'm going to jump in here and say, for me, Katie made it look too easy. I'm sure it's not going to be that easy.
It really is. It really, once you start, you're just getting used to a new system, and it's really straightforward, and there's so much documentation on our site and on the SDA site to help you.
It's really easy, okay? I love it.
The biggest concern when we were creating it for our funders, like who funds us, was that we would be making it too easy and that people could use it that wouldn't understand the data. So that's partly why we stress really looking at our documentation and whatnot, because our funders were worried it was too easy.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest complexities is having to combine person weights and household weights. And so I think the part that you said was when you were we were looking at means of transportation to work crossed by a household variable, that you should use that variable for the head of household.
Yes.
And then still use the person weight. So what variable was that again?
That was when I was doing vehicles, and you can use the person weight or the household weight. The main variable I was looking at was still a person level variable, so that's why I chose to use the person weight. If like your main variable of interest is a household variable, you can also elect to use that. They're going to be very similar in the end, kind of. It all sort of depends on the bottom line of what you're looking at, I would say.
Yeah, okay.
But yes, weighting gets pretty confusing. And
I think, the thing that I had to learn was how to code variables. That was the most important to me, particularly because of, wanting to combine tran work with the carpool variable, because in the microdata record it is the two variables, and then Katie also mentioned that there's this other variable called riders, which is related to the carpool question.
Yep.
So being able to combine all of those three into one variable is really important. And the other thing for recoding is, like I said earlier about classifying income ranges, classifying departure times and arrival times, actually, you probably don't have arrival times. We have in the CTPP, we have this variable called arrival time, which is the departure time plus the travel time.
I think we actually have arrival and departure times for the recent ACS variables.
Oh, cool. Okay. Lena, did you have a question?
Yep, arrives and departs.
Lena, you should hit *1 if you have a question. Oops. Okay. All right. So there's a question about understanding different kinds of regression models, and no, it's not the responsibility of this software to teach people how to learn about using multiple regression or logit and probit regressions. You have to learn that somewhere else, not through this web page.
Yeah. There's.
Okay. Let's see, Ed. Do you have any other questions that you think might be useful?
No, but I was thinking, as long as we're winding down, we can throw the phone lines open, and that way people can ask a few questions at the end if they didn't, as folks are drifting out.
Yeah, I mean, we actually have this room for another half hour. I reserved the room for an extra half hour, but I didn't want people to feel obliged to stay for the entire 2-hour period.
We do have a couple questions on the phone lines if you'd like to take them.
Sure. Okay, yes, please.
City of Bellevue, you may ask your question.
Hi, we wondered if you would do an example of the extract to SPSS.
The extract, definitely. Yep.
You'll have to go back to your screen.
Okay, so that's maybe the hardest part here. So I go to share screen. Is that what?
Pod.
Share. There we go. Share. And right up on my screen, someone had asked what the Minnesota Population Center website is, which is pop.umn.edu. And then this is IPUMS.org, which shows all of our data sources, microdata sources, and our aggregate data source. So this is sort of our hub of data activities. But if we go back and look at the extract system, I can quickly run through an extract, getting it, and then hopefully the computer I'm on has SPSS. I'm not going to guarantee it at this point, but we can see where we can get.
I know.
Is that?
And, I'm putting together. I got a packet with the 4F information.
Is that okay?
Set up the video conference, and we can go to the environmental page and so on. Where the worksheet is.
Is someone talking to me? Is that?
No.
Okay, I just want to make sure. So IPUMS registration, so you have to apply for access to become a user for our sites. And once you do this, it's still free. This is just an easy way to keep track of your extracts. So once we log in, I can then go and create an extract, which again, there are instructions for this online, and it's a nice, easy, straightforward. We're just going to go through the steps that they provide us to. These are all of our samples, and we'll just do the 2007 ACS since that's what we did before. We'll continue to the variable selection, and I'm going to select the variables as if I were studying transportation. So some variables are automatically selected for you, like the weights, group quarters, some important variables. Otherwise, you can select any variables you want yourself. I guess a big one, we talked about the ownership. This one is general and detailed. The case selection and attached variables features are nice additions we've made to the data, so I recommend looking into them if you're using this system. These are also our family interrelationship variables, so you can find out where people's families are. Number of children, I think, is important when looking at work things, number of couples, number of mothers, fathers, anything like that in there. I was looking again for vehicles. I don't know why I have trouble finding them. It's likely somewhere. There's total household income. And if we go down to person, we have relate, age, marital status, birthplace,
vehicle. Oops. Oh, well, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. We're just taking some. So we'll take all the work ones, and then we'll just go on. Do we just continue to the next step?
And also, Katie, after you do this, there is another question.
Okay, perfect.
Go through that, tell us about the project again, and then they are just trying to, they have an environmental consultant.
So when we go to the extract download page, this is what it will look like. Now you can see my request number 3 is, I just gave it a random description, but the code book and our 3 different sets of syntax files are there. There's a previous extract I have from Monday the 6th with a description of why, and here's the data file, the SPSS and data and SAS command files, and a code book. So let's just say that was the one I had got, because we're not exactly sure how long it'll take to create this data set. But from here, to get these data sets onto your computer, I like to right-click on the data and go to Save Target As. This isn't really my computer, so I'm going to save it to the desktop. And then I'm going to save this SPSS command file.
We can get them to get their environmental process quickly.
Sounds like somebody has an open line. If they could mute their phone, whoever has the background noise, that would probably be helpful. Thank you.
I don't see a show desktop button, so here's everything else. So it's not possible to extract data to Excel. Whoever just asked that, these data sets are really, really large, and Excel just isn't quite there to do that. And it's so you have to extract your data file. They come in a zip format because of their size, just the same reason why it's not on not able to go into Excel. We also zip them because it takes a while for them to transfer over to your computer. So this one is a pretty small data set. It transferred pretty quickly, and now I would extract it here. Different extraction programs do it differently. So I'm thinking that on this computer there is not SPSS because I can't do it. So so whoever asked me about SPSS, I'd be happy to send you directions in terms of opening it in SPSS, or is there any, were you hoping sort of beyond this, how to do it? I can add that that you have to go in and change your file so that it has the correct location on it, and then just run it into SPSS, which usually means double-clicking it in the SPSS world, I think, just double-clicking the file.
Okay, Judy, is that sufficient, what Katie's done for you? Okay, we'll assume yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Her line is open.
Judy? Yes,
that's
are you
sufficient. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Cynthia Hollingsworth has a question. She wanted to know if it's using replicate weights.
Replicate weights. For
on the ACS data set.
For the 3-year ACS data set. I think the replicate weights were maybe just made available for the 3-year, for 2005, 7, and the 3-year. So there are replicate weights for the ACS to 2005, 2006, 2007, and now they're also available for the 3-year. So we make the replicate weights available, but how you choose to use them in your in your data analysis and online it's not something because we don't really give advice on using Stata, SAS, or SPSS. We're not how you do them specifically in your program. We can't exactly tell you what to do, but I can encourage you to look at the documentation. And I also know I believe that there's a new set of census documentation that also helps. Okay. So in terms of using them with the 3-year, are you asking if it's something different than using them for single years, or just the idea of using replicate weights in general?
Cynthia, can you hit *1?
Your line is open.
Hi, this is Cynthia.
Mm-hmm.
I was asking, in terms of calculating the standard errors, do you use them? Do you use the replicate weights in your calculation?
Sometimes. Personally, we definitely have users that use them, that choose to use them for their standard errors. Other people don't. Often what I hear from users is that they'll just do the regular standard errors, and then they'll also do it with replicate weights. Replicate weights take a lot more memory. There's a lot of variables coming into your system, so you have a lot more variables. To do it, you need a decent amount of memory.
Okay.
So people don't, usually their results are pretty similar to a regular standard error.
Okay. And no, I was not asking, do you treat it differently from the 1 year versus the 3 year?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. So, Katie, I think, can you type into the chat room your IPUMS email address? Because then people could ask you questions.
Definitely. And I know there's, sending instructions about extracting the data to SPSS. Probably the best way to do that is to email this email address, and I'd be happy to email you instructions for getting the data into SPSS.
We still have some questions in the audio if you'd like to take them.
Yep, that's fine.
Please.
Bob Schwartz, you may ask your question.
I already asked it. I've already got it, the URL for the Minnesota Population Center.
Great.
One moment. It appears we have no more questions.
Okay, so I guess I did want to say something. I don't know if anybody from the Census Bureau is online, but the Census Bureau also has something called Data Ferret, and it can also be used for accessing PUMS data. I have never used it. I just love the IPUMS site, so I decided I don't need to learn about another software system. But that is another choice for people who are adventuresome and want to look around. Let's see. The other thing I was going to say was, we're almost done with the next issue of CTPP status report, and it does include an article about PUMS and IPUMS, but now that you've attended this session, you won't need that article. And I guess, finally, is Ed doing something? Oh, no, that was Katie doing something about Compass products.
Go ahead, the Census Bureau. I was just going to the Census Bureau site. Different information they have.
So the other thing that I was just going to mention, since you're all here and you're obviously interested in census data, is the Census Bureau did issue a Federal Register notice in early March regarding 5-year ACS standard data products, and the responses are due next Monday, April 20th. AASHTO is sending a response. Several other state DOTs have sent in responses. And what's important to do, if you're interested, is to look at not just the Federal Register notice, but also there are links in the notice to documents on the Census Bureau web page. In particularly, I can't talk. There's a page called Restrictions. It's called Restrictions on the Release of ACS 5-year Data Products Required for Disclosure Avoidance. And there is a particular rule that is specifically targets means of transportation to work. So you might want to look at that. If you have any questions about that, you can email Ed Christopher or myself.
So, Katie, this is Ed. Do I have to now call this IPUMS, or can I still call it IPUMS?
You know, you can call it IPUMS if you want. We call it IPUMS here, but maybe it sounds kind of cool because it's like an iPod, IPUMS.
Yeah, it's always been IPUMS to me.
I called it IPUMS originally, too, and I was interviewing to work here, and then I said IPUMS, and they were like, IPUMS? And I was like, oh, no.
Okay, so there's another question about is the month or the quarter when the survey was done on the record?
It is not on the record, and that actually sort of becomes an issue for something like age, or if you're trying to compute, in the decennial censuses, they were all asked sort of in April, and what was your age of your last birthday. So sometimes, and I believe even in some years, birth quarter is there. So it's definitely an issue for some people that are trying to look at really particular ages. In the PUMS samples, we do not know when they were interviewed, and we can't know. So
that would be a nice suggestion, though.
Yeah, you can call the Census Bureau and tell them.
Have another product put out that instead of doing an annual product, you group 3 years worth of data for winter and summer, or group it by 4 seasons or by month.
I think that would be definitely useful to researchers.
Yeah, we did a very early project at the Census Bureau Research Data Center in Boston to look at seasonality. And actually there was very little seasonal difference, at least for the area that we looked at, which was somewhere in Massachusetts. But we think that places like Florida or Arizona, there might be some other differences that would be picked up when looking at seasonality.
I bet there will be, and we're actually at the University of Minnesota here in connection with the Minnesota Population Center. We're building in a research data center currently that we hope to have open in about a year or two, and that would be a research project, I think, for there.
Okay, Katie, can you type in your email address again from the chat room? Oh, well, the other interesting thing that Katie said, and we'll wrap up in just one more minute, is that the American Time Use Survey is included on their site now. And I think this is something that will really be a huge benefit to the transportation community. Several years ago, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics did do a project where they compared the NHTS data with the American Time Use Survey. They thought the American Time Use Survey would have more trips reported, but actually it turned out that it was about the same. So the American Time Use Survey is more like an activity survey.
I think it's on the chopping block, though.
I think it's back on. It's not on the chopping block anymore. It's been saved at this point.
Okay.
Okay, because, it's looking at things like, you got up in the morning, you got dressed, you made breakfast, then you drove to work, then you went out to lunch, you went to shopping, and went back to work, things like that. So I have never used IPUMS to look at American Time Use Survey, but I think this is wonderful news, and I plan to play with it.
Definitely. It's actually taken our most advanced sort of computing knowledge we've had to create it because of just what you said, this interesting sort of database where they're filling out how they spent their time and then who they were spending it with. So not only what they were doing, but what secondary activity they were doing at the same time. And it's great that we have it in an extract system now, and we're hoping it sort of catches on and that people use it in this new, easy-to-use system.
Well, okay. If there are no further questions, I'll just ask one more time. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will end. So, *1 if you have a question.
At this time, we have no questions.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you especially to Katie.
Yeah, no problem.
I have another request for Katie to talk at the GIST conference already. And so thank you so much for doing a special training for us with transportation variables, and I think we all learned a lot, and you're going to have a lot of new users on the IPUMS systems, and I'm certainly going to do more with it, especially with the American Time Use Survey. And thank you also to Gary and Ed and Leong for helping with me with the technology.
Great. Thank you guys for listening.